Dr. Gordon MacLeod and Tanzania.
My name, as it says on the board, is Gordon MacLeod. Please don't call me doctor. I feel very old already. I prefer just Gordon. And I like to stand when I talk. So if you can hear me, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Great. I'll try to speak slowly. When I get excited, I speak very fast. And I've got a funny Canadian accent, I know. But let me try to speak slowly and calmly. I call it Africa's Calling for a simple reason. I was very honored to be a part of the Square Kilometre Array project in South Africa. And that's actually the reason why I'm standing here today. The Square Kilometre Array project is the largest radio telescope in the world. And in 2009, I joined the Department of Science and Technology in South Africa, where they asked me to provide expert advice in astronomy. Basically, I was asked to determine if the astronomers were lying to them. So the government needed a test. They needed somebody inside the government that could tell them if the astronomers were telling them the truth or not. Because the government didn't understand the astronomy. They understood economics, they understood business, they understood how government policy filters down to the community, but they didn't understand the actual astronomy. So when you want to invest, and the SKA project itself is the Square Kilometre Array, the SKA. The project itself is a $5 billion investment in Southern Africa. So it's an enormous project, absolutely enormous, it's staggering. And when it's built, this is the most important point for Africa and why I was hired, was that the project itself would have to have the world's fastest supercomputer. So eventually, if they build the SKA, the world's fastest supercomputer will sit in Cape Town. Not in China, not in America. It will sit inside on the African continent. And likewise, they have to have the largest data collection system in the world. So South Africa, and it was a no-brainer. The Treasury Department in South Africa had decided that if we invest 2 billion rand to build a precursor antenna that would then help us to win the bigger prize, which was a $5 billion project, it was a worthwhile investment because it would mean that South Africa could become the world leaders in data processing, supercomputing. The internet speed would have to go up to 200 terabytes a second. So the telescope, the SKA, will produce so much data, it will get 200 terabytes a second from the telescope. So every hour, the SKA will produce all of the data of all knowledge of the entire world in 1 hour. So the computer does not yet exist to process the Square Kilometre Array data. They have to use Moore's Law for it to catch up so that they can build that. Now I'm telling you this story because my job as part of the Department of Science and Technology, I've now left, by the way, I've gone back into astronomy, and my job was to help doing human capital development. And while I was doing that into Africa, going to Botswana, Namibia, all the countries that are partners of the Square Kilometre Array, I actually had the good pleasure of presenting to the COSTEC. So Dr. Rashid that was there, it was headed by your permanent secretary from COSTEC, who was heading the project. I don't have his name there. And this is a brief history of what occurred. So in May 2010, I was standing in a room much like this in South Africa with a Tanzanian delegation, and they wanted me to talk about the SKA because the Tanzanian government had an interest in getting involved. Why not? It's the world's fastest supercomputer. It's going to be cloud computing. It's going to be high radio astronomy. For anybody who doesn't know, radio astronomy is effectively engineering on steroids. The engineering going into building a radio telescope requires material sciences, electronics, computer sciences, ICT, now internet, supercomputing, and so on. So you have to understand that the reason why people want to get involved in radio astronomy is because it's an enormous investment in very cutting-edge engineering research. So never mind the astronomy, which I want to do, the engineers involved also are PhD engineers, and they themselves are cutting their careers, creating whole new technologies, okay, signal processing, and so on. And so I met with the delegation from Tanzania, and they were interested in being involved in the square kilometer array. However, I realized immediately, and I knew this from before, there's groups of people around the world looking for world-class millimeter sites, and millimeter is a little different than radio. Radio, you can do it at sea level, you can do it in the rain, you can do it basically 24 hours a day. It's a different, the wavelength regime is such that it sees through clouds, okay? But millimeter can't see through clouds. Millimeter, you have to be above the atmosphere. So you want a high dry site. So they build it in very funny places, on top of volcanoes, in the Hawaiian Islands, in the Atacama Desert, in Chile, and so on. And so I knew, talking to the Tanzanian government, Tanzania, and I did know that Tanzania hosts Mount Kilimanjaro, contrary to those people who believe it's part of Kenya. So I didn't have to be told Kilimanjaro was in Tanzania. I knew that. So at least my geography was pretty good. Others would think different. Anyways, and I recognized this opportunity, and I said to the Tanzanian government that was visiting the Department of Science and Technology, wouldn't you rather build a millimeter telescope on top of Kilimanjaro? And I immediately thought they would just say no to me, and they would just tell me to go away, and thank you. And they got very excited by this. And so they said, yes, what can we do? And I wrote to friends, and those friends wrote back to me, and one offered me a telescope within 24 hours. They offered me a $20 million telescope to go on to Kilimanjaro within 24 hours of me suggesting. So that was the excitement of the world for millimeter. So when I say there's excitement looking at putting a telescope on Kilimanjaro, I'm very serious. The global community, because they need one more site around the world so they can actually look at the black hole at the center of our galaxy. And there's three groups in the world. There's a Russian group, a European group, and an American group. Each want to be the first to take an image of the black hole at the center of our galaxy. And I'll show you a simulation of what it might look like in a moment or two. But they want to win a Nobel Prize, effectively. Because if you can prove the actual existence of a black hole, which is not yet proven, we do it through gravitational effects and so on, they may get a Nobel Prize. So their interest is to win a Nobel Prize. That is not my interest. I could care less about Nobel Prizes. What I'm interested in is testing Kilimanjaro to see if it's a world-class radio astronomy site. And quite frankly, I believe it probably is one of the top 3 in the world. So if we can get to 4,000 plus meters and test that site, and that's the goal of this project. And I'll give you some idea of the science of this. But I actually believe Kilimanjaro is probably one of the top 3 sites in the world for astronomy in particular, but in particular millimeter astronomy. So it's a very particular type of science. And so that's what we have. Dr. Jiwaji joined the project, and he's now driving the project here in Tanzania and has done an excellent job. And fortunately for me, has invited me, and I was able to come. I hope I can help. So. That's what I'm talking. And this is why I'm telling you about millimeter astronomy. Here's all the sites in the world that do these things. This is a telescope in Japan, basically at 1,300 meters. This BLA is at 2,000 meters in the US. I did my PhD on this. So I did 13 hours, I was given 13 hours of observing on this telescope, and I wrote a PhD on that. Just gives you an idea of the power of that telescope, what it produces from the results of it. I only had 13 hours of observing, that was it. And if I buggered them up, I wouldn't have got my PhD. So it would have been something like that. And then of course, the best site in the world is here, it's ALMA. This is the gold standard. So if you want millimeter astronomy, this site is at 5,000 plus meters in the Chilean desert. It rains once every 10 years. So it's very, very dry. In fact, if you were to die on this plateau, you would become a mummy. Your body would actually become, it would dry out, and you'd become a mummy. They find mummies in this desert. So people go there still, it's part of their religion, is to go up and bury their dead on top of this mountain. So they mummify. So actually, along this, in this desert, you will find mummies. So it's kind of a bit of an eerie thing. I've never been up there, but I'd love to go. You go up there and you can walk along on the plateau, and you can actually find, in shallow graves, dead people who have been mummified, 100 years ago. So it's that dry. And that dry, high and dry, means we can do millimeters. So we're above the atmosphere. Okay, the key word is being above the clouds, above all the moisture in the air. Moisture causes the signal coming from space to get weak to the point where we can't detect it. And so if there's too much moisture, you can't see anything. You just see blank sky. I mean, for example, if I look out the window, how many stars can I see right now looking out that window? Anybody have an answer for me? How many stars can I see looking out that window? Can you see any stars? What? 0. Why? It's daytime. So the sunlight is bouncing around in the atmosphere of the Earth, and therefore it blocks out the stars getting through because they're much weaker than the sun. So if the same is true in millimeter. If there's water in the atmosphere, the millimeter waves bounce around so much they no longer get to the telescope. So this thing has to be up at a very high altitude. So you want 4,000, you want 5,000 meters. And to be honest with you, when you're building a telescope, what you want is the highest one. So for prestige purposes, I would always want to build the highest site. And the best site for us in Kilimanjaro is at Mwenzi at 5,150 meters. Because then we can say we have the highest site in the world, which would be something that can be recognized. But let's live with 4,000 plus. We'll be happy. Anyway, so that's why you choose high and dry. High and dry is the thing to remember in millimeter astronomy. You want to be above the clouds. And these are all the various telescopes around the world. You can see them here. You can't really see very well. But you see the altitude. So here's one of the telescopes. This is you guys. This is Kilimanjaro, a site that I looked at. And I visited Kilimanjaro in 2012, and I tried to find something. Has anybody in this room been up Kilimanjaro? Who's been up Kilimanjaro? Right. Okay. Celia, what does this look like to you? Does it remind you